The series begins as young children recall their versions of the invasion on Earth that happened 6 months ago. An extraterrestrial species attacked Earth and quickly neutralized the world's power grid. They then defeated and largely destroyed all the world's militaries and killed over 90% of the human population. The aliens include mechanical attack drones called mechs who are controlled by a species of 6-legged beings known as skitters. Currently, the children draw pictures of their families, alien airships, and friends with strange contraptions on the back of their necks. The aliens round up children between the ages of 8 and 18 and attach a biomechanical mind control harness to their spines. Forcibly removing it generally kills the child. However, the survivors of the devastating attack banded together and formed a resistance group headed by Chief Commander Porter. One of these survivors is Tom Mason, a former Boston University military history professor, who is now a soldier in a rebel subgroup named 2nd Massachusetts Militia Regiment, or 2nd Mass. He has 3 sons, Hal, Ben, and Matt, while his wife died early in the invasion. In the present day, Ann Glass, who was formerly a pediatrician, and is currently in charge of medical facilities in the 2nd Mass, observes the children expressing themselves through their drawings. Matt tells her that his mother died during the attacks and his older brother, Ben, was kidnapped. He then shows her a drawing of his father and older brother, Hal, who have currently gone out to scavenge for supplies. In a dark street, Tom and Hal look for food and other supplies. They grab a food cart but are ambushed by mechs, who destroy the food except for a can of tuna. As the duo runs away, human soldiers fire guns at the aliens behind barricades, but they are no match for the superior firepower of the mechs, who completely annihilate the barricade and kill the soldiers. The father and son hide in an empty store while skitters attack Jameson, the head of 2nd Mass, and a teenager on whom they insert a harness. Horrified, the father-son duo exits and finds other armed soldiers retreating from their posts. Just then, an alien airship flies overhead and fires a missile, causing a bright light to consume the atmosphere around them. With that single attack, South Boston also falls under alien control. Dismayed, the group runs away back to their base. Upon arrival, Tom informs Ann about the enemies taking over South Boston, when suddenly he is called by Commander Porter for a meeting. There, Porter discusses his plan to leave the city and break off into groups. The alien airships can detect groups of humans which contain more than 600 people. Hence, the commander splits his brigade into smaller groups consisting of 100 fighters and 200 civilians. He then puts retired U.S. Army Colonel Dan Weaver in charge of the 2nd Mass, and Tom is his second in command. The following day, the fighters and civilians begin to move with all the artillery and food packed in old, rusty vehicles. They search for food in stores, but all the shops in the nearby area have already been cleaned up. When Tom suggests stocking up from a food center behind their current location, Weaver refuses to go back. The veteran colonel points out that their convoy is too slow because their numbers are too large. Determined, Tom volunteers to go back with a small group of fighters to bring back rations and supplies to their convoy. Weaver reluctantly agrees to give him 6 fighters and a pickup truck for the mission, but does not give them any heavy artillery. Soon after, Hal, Karen, Di, Anthony, Click, and Jimmy join Tom in the hunt for the supplies. Thankfully, Di has a couple of C4 explosives that he hands to the history professor before leaving. The search party then breaks into 2 groups where Hal and Karen leave the others to look out for any incoming aliens. After a while, Hal sees mechs and a group of harnessed kids following the alien robots. To his surprise, he also notices his brother, Ben, among the kids. He immediately returns to tell his father that Ben has been harnessed by the aliens, but nonetheless alive. After months of searching for his missing son, this news finally brings some hope in Tom. Yet, he insists that they stick with the mission at hand because there are simply too many mechs for them to tackle. Hal disagrees and tries to go and find his brother, but his father wrestles him to the ground and convinces him to follow the orders. Later that night, the group finds a supply store with food and carefully scouts the area for aliens. Finding none, they quickly begin to load the food into their truck. However, this false sense of security backfires when Hal unloads 2 boxes of cereals, only to be attacked by a skitter. Fortunately, Tom arrives after hearing a loud noise and immediately fires at it. Just as Hal runs away, a mech is alerted and comes after Tom, who is caught up in changing his magazine. Just then, his son fires at the metallic beast, which distracts it away from the professor. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Tom puts C4 explosives in a shopping cart and wheels it next to the mech, ultimately blowing it to pieces. But the skitter refuses to give up and lunges at him when suddenly Di shoots the alien in its head with a shotgun. At close range, the alien dies slowly due to its gunshot wound, and the group observes it before it dies. The following morning, the 6 fighters return to the convoy with enough food to last them a few more days. Tom tells Weaver that his son is still alive, and that he and Hal must go looking for Ben. However, the stern colonel declines his request and says they must raid the armory for weapons. Tom is forced to agree with his commander, but tells him that they will go and find Ben once they raid the armory. Before the second mass leaves the city, Hal gives his brother his birthday gift, a ripstick that he acts like is from their father. The children of the convoy play with it one by one as the adults watch, bringing back memories of times before the invasion. But soon enough, Weaver announces that it is time to leave and they all mount out on foot. After nightfall, Tom and the other members, including a dog, gather at the armory as instructed by Colonel Weaver. Hal throws a tennis ball to the entrance, hoping that the dog with them will go for it, drawing out any hiding enemy. As the dog moves forward towards the building, barking loudly, a mech appears from inside. Before it can kill the dog, a 13-year-old soldier, Jimmy, rushes to save the dog. However, their position is compromised as Tom rushes in to save Jimmy right before the mech can blow him to pieces. With their plan unsuccessful, the group returns back to the base. The next morning, Tom informs Weaver about the previous night's events. Uncompromising and stern, the colonel tells Tom to return back to the armory again that night. As the two men argue, Anne interrupts them and confronts Weaver about the current sleeping situation. It is revealed that the civilians are living in tents outside while the fighters sleep in the relative comfort of abandoned houses. Anne deems it unfair, yet the army leader believes the soldiers need proper rest to guard the convoy. Later, Anne and Tom then discuss the issue of civilians versus the military, but the latter believes that civilians are a liability in active wars. The pair then watch Uncle Scott, a former lecturer, teach the young kids about biology. After the class is over, Uncle Scott talks to Tom about how some of his students noticed a strange phenomenon among the aliens. He points out that human-made robots look like humans, but the mechs, which are the alien robots, do not look like the skitters. Elsewhere, Karen talks to Hal about how other girls in their camp also fancy him, just like she does. But the young boy doesn't seem to care about other girls and kisses her. However, their moment of romance is interrupted by Tom, who tells his son they are due to return to the armory later. Later that night, the group gets ready to once again raid the armory to check if they can find any weapons there. 13-year-old Jimmy is told that another soldier, Click, will be going in his place, which disappoints him. At the armory, Click is shot and killed by 2 arrows that seem to come out of nowhere. But just as he goes down, he shoots and hits someone in the leg. It is then revealed that he managed to hit not an alien, but a group of human outlaws who are also at the armory. Unfortunately, the outlaws capture the second mass group as they had already caught Hal and Karen beforehand. The outlaws, led by a man named John Pope, take the group to an auditorium and tie them up. Outspoken and bold, Pope interrogates about the group's intentions, and Tom promptly responds to all his questions. Suddenly, the stranger pulls a gun on Tom, but Hal tells him that they can help his group get weapons. Following this, Hal is led out of the auditorium by Margaret, a woman in Pope's gang, who gives him 1 hour to go back and get guns from the second mass. In the meantime, Tom and Pope discuss the aliens, and Tom discovers that the stranger is a gifted fighter. As a leader of the ragtag group of raiders, he had even managed to kill a skitter in single combat. As the conversation goes on, Tom asks for a beer and is untied by Pope, but when the stranger notices Tom eyeing his brother's weapon, he confronts him and ties him up once more. Meanwhile, Hal returns and informs Weaver about the situation, but the stern colonel refuses to trade with the outlaws. He even asks another soldier, Mike, to take Hal upstairs as a prisoner until the convoy is ready to leave. However, Mike, who is a good friend of Tom, allows the youngster to leave. Just as Hal is running away, he bumps into Anne, who offers her to go with him. They both return to the auditorium only to be found by Margaret. Thinking on the spot, Anne offers her assistance as a doctor to help the wounded outlaw, Billy. Inside, she bandages up his leg and stops the arteries from bleeding out. Enraged at not getting his weapon, Pope leaves his men, Q-Ball and Margaret, in charge of the prisoners while he and his other outlaws attempt to rob the second mass. Soon after, the leader of the outlaws arrives at the meadow where the second mass have camped and sends a flare into the air to alert the alien airships. He gives Weaver an ultimatum to give them food and the .50 calories machine gun in exchange for his hostages. Disgruntled, the colonel reluctantly agrees and hands over food and ammunition. Back at Pope's base, Billy, Q-Ball and Margaret hold Tom and the others captive. Billy tells Karen to stand up, turn around and show her body. Aggravated by this behavior, Margaret kills Billy and Cue-Ball quickly and then lets the hostages go. At the base of Second Mass, Pope and his group load up the car and prepare to leave with their ransom. Suddenly, Tom and his group ambush them, unloading bullets which kill 3 of the outlaws. The rest of them manage to hide behind the car that's carrying the .50 calories machine gun. Despite being cornered, their leader declines the offer to join the Second Mass and waits for the aliens' attack. Soon enough, an enemy airship flies above the area and gets attracted by the flares around the spot where the outlaws are hiding. Just as the airship fires a small missile, Pope drives away in the car, leaving his men to be killed by the explosion. However, he does not get far away as Colonel Weaver shuts his way out and pulls a gun on him. The next day, Weaver confronts Tom about walking right into a trap set by amateur robbers. Despite this, the colonel then gives him a 3-day period to go find his son Ben. After putting Pope in custody, Tom, Hal, Karen, Di, Anthony, and Margaret move towards a local hospital in search of Ben. In the next scene, Tom, Hal, Karen, Anthony, Di, and Margaret watch as several harnessed kids collect scrap metal for the aliens. Tom sees his son, Ben, and the group prepare to launch an attack to grab him. However, Karen accidentally knocks a loose piece of tile from the building which alerts the aliens. The Mechs waste no time and shoot at the roof, but the group manages to run away. Back at their new hideout, a local school, parents of harnessed kids come over and ask Tom if he saw anything. Mike tells them to back off as more and more badger the professor for any information on their children. Meanwhile, Porter, who arrived at the school earlier, calls a briefing for the fighters in a classroom. It is revealed that long-distance communication collapsed when the Skitters detonated EMP attacks on human satellites at the start of the invasion. This caused the resistance to rely on scouts to physically run to find out more information. After several months, the runners have finally returned bringing both positive and negative news. The commander reports that they contacted another human resistance militia in the outskirts of Chicago, who in turn told them that they had contacted other resistance cells in Oklahoma and Texas. In fact, there were non-confirmed reports of surviving human resistance groups as far away as California. Fortunately, this means that the Massachusetts Resistance Unit is no longer alone, and they are going to begin coordinating a nationwide guerrilla war against the aliens. Porter then suggests that they start thinking tactically, gathering reconnaissance on Skitter tactics, technology, and troop deployments. After the meeting is over, the commander tells Tom that his head doctor has a theory on how to remove the harnesses from children. He then tells the professor to bring his son back safely as the doctor wants to test his surgical procedure on Ben. However, Matt later tells his father about a rumor he has heard. When a harness is removed, the kids do not survive. In the meantime, Pope is given food in his cell but finds it disgusting. He tells Uncle Scott that he was a chef before the invasion and gives him tips to make the food tastier. At first, Scott is incredulous at this, but Pope explains that when he was in prison he worked the kitchen detail and took cooking correspondence classes on the side to get certified because the other prisoners would have knifed him if the food was bad. After a short while, Colonel Weaver interviews Pope about the possibility of letting him cook for everyone. Elsewhere, Tom finds Anne, who informs him about the chief of medicine, Dr. Harris. Surprisingly, Tom knows Harris and the two of them discuss Ben and Tom's late wife, Rebecca. The following day, Tom, Hal, Karen, Di, and Mike split up in 3 groups and go to find Ben. While hiding behind rubble, Mike sees his son and runs toward him. Despite the danger of the Mechs and Skitters, he grabs his son but is soon cornered by one of the giant metal beasts. Fortunately, Tom deploys a bomb they had planted earlier underneath a car and manages to destroy the Mech. Just as they are loading Mike's son on the back of a car, another Mech immediately arrives on the spot and blows up a vehicle nearby. This knocks Tom out, but Di grabs and takes him in their car, leaving Hal and Karen behind. Later, in a dark alley, Tom wakes up with Mike, his son, and Di, who informs him that Hal and Karen were left behind. Enraged, the professor decides to go to find them all on his own and takes a shotgun and ropes from Di. However, shortly after he heads down the alleyway, a Skitter ambushes him and easily gains an upper hand. Following Pope's advice, Tom shoots 2 of its legs off with a shotgun and beats it half to death. In the next scene, the injured professor returns to the school with the Skitter and deems it a prisoner of war. On the other hand, an injured Hal wakes up in the same spot where the Mech attacked earlier that day. He sees harnessed kids, including Ben, come and drag an unconscious Karen away with them. Delusional and weak, the youngster cannot gather enough strength to stop them. Suddenly, a Mech and a Skitter arrive at the spot, followed by a group of harnessed kids. In a harrowing twist, the skidder then orders the Mech to execute the kids right in front of Hal. Back at the school, Dr. Harris successfully removes the harness from Mike's son with the help of Anne and Di. He explains that his team figured out why children always died in previous attempts to remove the harnesses. They synthesize some sort of drug into the body, stimulating the brain's nerve receptors in some way that facilitates mind control. Whatever this drug is, suddenly being separated from it made children die of shock. Harris theorizes that while they didn't know exactly what the drug was, it must have vaguely similar effects as other drugs that stimulate the cognitive centers of the brain, such as morphine. Injecting a child with a large dose of morphine before removing the harness would serve as a bridge to safely transition off of the alien drug without fatally shocking the brain. After this procedure, the child could be incrementally weaned off the morphine. Using this method, Harris and Anne are able to successfully cut the harness off Mike's son without killing him. However, the chief doctor says that it is impossible to remove the tips of the needles that have fused into the child's spine, as they seem to be some sort of nanotechnology that grows into the spine the longer it is present. Meanwhile, Tom finds Hal alive at the site of the attack that afternoon. The dazed youngster embraces his father and reveals all the harrowing things that he witnessed. Tom explains that the Nazis used similar tactics against Allied prisoners of war in World War II. If one prisoner managed to escape, they would execute entire groups but leave one witness behind. This would let the Allies know the harsh consequences of trying to escape. Similarly, the Skidders let Hal escape because they want to discourage the human resistance from attempting to free more harnessed children. Following this, Tom returns to the school and finds Anne sleeping near the surgical bed. He reveals that Hal blames himself for Karen's abduction and is not taking it well mentally. Although Anne wants to clean him up and talk about what happened, Tom is more interested in finding Harris. The scene shifts as Dr. Harris drinks while watching the captured Skidder, disgruntled and pessimistic. When Tom arrives, he tries to greet his old friend, but the professor is in no mood for friendship. It is revealed that Harris abandoned Tom's sick wife, Rebecca, and left her to die when the attacks began. Harris denies this initially but eventually admits to thinking that he was more useful than Rebecca and left her to die in order to save himself. Realizing that Rebecca's death may save Ben's life due to Harris's expertise, Tom puts a picture of Ben up on the wall of missing children. In the operating room, Mike's son, Rick, lays down on a stretcher and the scene cuts to the captured Skidder. Just as the alien opens its eyes, it cuts back to Rick, who opens his eyes too. The next day, the Skidder that Tom captured is put in a cage and Anne and Harris are given the task of studying it. The alien seems to become angrier at the sight of Tom, who growls back that he remembers it too. Meanwhile, Pope mentions that he knows of a motorcycle dealership not too far from the school, where they might pick up some bikes, which would help in transporting vital medicine to the base. Hearing this, the colonel tells Tom to take a team of soldiers and get the bikes. While Tom is desperate to rescue Ben, it's pointed out that the kids who undergo the harness removal operation need these drugs desperately. Rick is still under a morphine drip, and if the second mass is going to rescue more kids, they're going to need more drugs. Reluctantly, Tom agrees to have Pope join them on the mission. On the other hand, Matt is frustrated that he can't help his father and brother as he is too young to fight, but he's picked by Uncle Scott to help monitor radio signals by using a hand-cranked receiver, while Anne shows the alien pictures of Earth and the galaxy to see whether she can get the Skidder to share a little bit of its language. Harris takes a much more visceral approach. He brings in the corpse of the Skidder that Pope's gang killed and shows it to the captive alien, who reacts negatively to the dead body. At the same time, Matt notices a burst of static on the radio. Meanwhile, on the way to the dealership, Tom and his group run across a nest of sleeping Skidders who are perched upside down under a bridge. Pope suggests blowing them up, but the professor thinks that the attack would bring too much attention to them. Since they do not have enough ammunition or soldiers to fend off a large-scale Mech attack, they pass the Skidder nest by. Later, the team reaches the bike dealership and starts to explore the store. While Di is distracted with spare parts for the bikes, Pope blindsides him and escapes on a motorbike. He quickly reaches the Skidder's nest and ends up blowing it up, which calls unwanted attention to the team. Soon afterwards, Tom and company are surrounded by a group of harnessed teens who are armed with heavy machine guns. They open fire on the shop and in the melee, Di is shot on his leg. Despite this, the professor refuses to shoot at the kids, even when several team members urge him to do so. However, they discover that the kids don't seem to have any guidance other than shooting at an obviously visible target. So Tom throws a makeshift petrol bomb underneath a car to distract the kids while they escape on the bikes. As Tom and Di escape on a motorcycle, they are attacked by the Skidder that is controlling the kids. The two manage to kill it, but Tom decides to leave behind the motionless kids for another day. Meanwhile, Rick gains consciousness, but when Mike attempts to talk to his son, The kid refuses to not recognize him. The harness has somehow cured Ricky's cystic fibrosis as well. Frustrated, Mike tries to communicate with the skidder, asking why they chose the kids and why his son was cured. When the skidder doesn't answer to his satisfaction, he shoves the barrel of a rifle into the skidder's mouth, which causes the alien to collapse. At the same time, more static is picked up by Matt and Scott's radios in the lab. This suggests that the aliens must use radio waves to communicate. Following this, Harris and N do an autopsy on the dead skidder to see whether any of the internal organs lend themselves to radio communication. But the corpse has been dead too long and everything inside has turned to mush. Unbeknownst to them, the captive skidder wakes Ricky and makes the kid place the harness back onto his spine. Ricky then tries to free the alien but is stopped by Mike and the others in the nick of time. To the horror, the skidder begins to communicate through the kid, asking them to free it. When they refuse to do so, the skidder asks them to kill it so that it won't be punished. Infuriated, Mike takes his son and rips the harness off his back. Later that night, Tom and his group return to the base where he discusses the mission with Colonel Weaver. The professor suggests that the harness teens were used against them as a form of psychological warfare, which Weaver notes was successful as Tom's team couldn't fire on them. Taking this as a sign that the skidders think like humans, he suggests they can beat them by learning about them. Following this, Tom once more states his intention to go after Ben and the other kids, and Weaver grants permission. As Tom leaves, he is approached by Maggie, who states that every pharmacy within 20 miles is empty. While Tom is willing to go out further, Maggie suggests that there is another solution. In the final scene, the group sits down together to have the bread that Pope left for them. Even among the chaos and uncertainty, they say grace before beginning their dinner. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave 1,000 likes or 100 comments if you'd like us to continue part 2. Thank you.